Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I want to explain why negativity or negative dipole or side of being on the negative side of the dipole is essential to transform into positivity, and why, like what would happen if we had just a static world, or if we were only resided in the positive direction. But that would imply that, like, there's always a reference point, a cyclic reference point. So if you consider a 24-hour cycle, we generally split it in half. So we have the sun and the oscillation. So you have the sun's movement, progresses, transgresses, and then there's night. So right here, this is like, we can make a reference. This could be the positive side, and this could be the negative side. Light, darkness. So, this is light, and this is darkness, so forth. But then we also, within these cycles, we also have what is individual cycles that have different periods, different amplitudes. The rhythm of our neurotransmitters, our mood cycle, hormone cycle, sleep cycle, so forth. And there's different offsets, and basically the offsets kind of correspond to the energy shifts. And we essentially naturally there is a cycle, because the natural cycle and the biological cycle are kind of in tune, just like musical beats are in tune. There's resonance, there's frequency, there's motion, there's movement, and essentially the reference point, whether it goes in a positive direction or it goes in the negative direction, depends on the changes in terms of, or basically how in tune the beats are, how in tune the cycle is on a relative scale. But if these were dampened in such a way, if these were, if it was only everything was static and just in the, let's say, static or completely static would be imply there would exist no cycles, like just have a flat line, which really means there's no reference point. But because cycles have to exist, even cycles exist due to the genetic deviation. For instance, if we take a node, we start with a point, it started with a point, and there's a projection. We have two nodes, and then there could be a split again, and then split, just like you split an atom, or you split. This is fission. So this is like a fission process, just like nuclear fission. But in this case, it's divergence of genetics. So let's just suppose it started here, and then we had a man. This is like a man and a woman, and this is like there's initial genetics, so forth, and what ends up happening is there's changes. So on a relative scale, so like say this is so let's just say this is node 1, and this is let's just say we're going from, this is node 2, we're going from top to bottom, and then let's say this is like from here, from this case, this is node 2-1, node 2-2, and let's just say this is node 3. So this is like node 3-1, node 3-2, node 3-3. So they correspond. And then, we can go to node 4, which is from top to bottom, and so forth. But there's divergence. So if you take like, this is node 2-1 with respect to node 2. So basically the offspring. And then we consider, let's just say, the genetic permutations. So if we consider the let's consider this as like a neutral axis. this is relative to the permutations. Well, there is going to be a somewhat of an oscillation or a deviance. Like, so there could be over here. It could exist deviate this far, in this direction, negative direction. So this is like positive, and negative could be like superior, subordinate, in this direction. But it's always changing. It's always evolving depending on the environment, the circumstances, right? So it's kind of predicated by the environment as well, and that dictates the deviation. So there's always this cyclic process over time. So over time, so if we take a time axis, and the deviance is going to follow another cycle. So this is the deviance, or like this is, we could think of this as the how would I put it? This is genetic potential. We could just think of potential. And it's hard to quantify potential, but we do know what positive represents. And we do, like, if you get taller, or it doesn't have to be height, it could be stronger or in some form of genetic, you're moving in a positive direction. If you get sick, that's kind of, it's in a negative direction, or sick relative to what happened. So now when it boils down to being in a negative, like think of depression, for instance. So like I like to think of depression, even though clearly depression's you don't want to think of depression. No one wants to think of depression. So typically we have a mood cycle. Everyone has it. So this is a positive side, this is a negative side. Generally a normal mood is like this. There exists a limit. This is the upper bound, this is the lower bound. And this limit is defined by us. This is called the range of normality. And that changes depending on who you talk to and so forth. Okay, so this is all relative to the globalized scale. What we deem as normal. Normality doesn't really exist because it's subjective. It's always changing, it's always evolving, and therefore this can go in this direction, or it can go in this direction. It can go in this direction, or it can go in that direction. So, taking this, depression would be defined as something over here, points euphoria over here. And so you gotta think. So I like to consider, suppose now, how would I put this? So we could just say on the time, let's define this on the events. How would I put this? Because there's a biological cycle, which is kind of, and there's a mapping between biological cycle and reaction to external events. So basically, suppose there's events E1, E2, E3, all the way to En. So generally, like, we can think of a box. This is a event. It's in space. It's a localized region. Think of a localized region. Space-time. Space-time. So space and time on a relative scale. And suppose these are, we could consider overlapping events. So this is an event, and suppose there's like a there's a degree of overlap. So this is like E1, E2, ... And then we have event En. Suppose now there's an overlap. How will I define this? Okay, so think of it like this. Suppose now the overlap between events. Some events could, so this is overlap. Say for all events. So it's equivalence. There's an equivalence in the overlap. What's this suppose? That means that there's bits of information that are transferred from one event to another. Meaning it's analogous to like you experience something, and within the event, the same thing occurs. It occurs in equivalence. Like the same process occurs again. The same process. But the event is it's a subset of that. So that's a sub-event. Suppose an equivalent sub-event occurs from one event to the next. And the reason I state this is, okay, so what we can define right here is that there's a range of overlap. So overlap always has a range. Like we could have mutually exclusive, and there's a distance. There's a distance between them. That means this distance, this is a distance in the negative direction. And then think of this as a distance. Think of this as a distance in the positive direction. Because when we adapt to an environment, if it were the same, we can't adapt if it's an equivalent mapping. So we're going to relate that as positive, I guess, because technically it's not. You want to adapt, but it would be comfortable. But again, if it becomes too deviant, the distance or the difference between events is so vast that generally, how would I put this? To me, it's based on perception because everything is connected in some way. So you could argue that there is overlap in all given situations, but we're considering what is focused on. If an event, in this case, it's like you have an event and something bad happens. You go to another event. That same thing is bound to happen. The same event, like it's the same thing occurs again. It recurs within that, but it acts as a sub event of that event. And what ends up happening is you build resistance so that you do not make the same mistake again because it happened before. So this is why the negative, this is what I'm trying to get, is there's a negative, how would I put it? There's it's called, just like adaptation, there's a resistance, a force of resistance that is built when we experience a similar external event. So in this case, suppose this is like event 1. So like we're going to represent by nodes. This is negative, this is positive. This is the external reaction. So let's suppose we go into negative. It's a vector of magnitude. Now, this is E1. So now, let's just go now to E2, provided that the same event recurred. So basically, how would we put this? Event how could we define this? This sub-event would be, let's just call this E2, which is mapped from E1 is mapped onto E2. So E1 slash E2. So this is E1 slash E2. So this is just a recurring event. Essentially what happens is it should be like this and so forth. And suppose now that with the next event, like E3, the same, how should I define this? Suppose in event 3 that now event 1 and 2 are subsets of event 3. So basically, yeah, this would be it. So event 1 is a subset of event 2. Event 1, event 2 is a subset of event 3. Event 1, event 2, event 3 is a subset of E4. So if you follow the pattern, basically, it would be, if you kept going, it would be E1, E2, all the way to En minus 1 is a subset of En. Okay, so this is the criteria. So essentially now, in this case, we're just going to take E1, event 1, which is E3. It's still part of a subset. So eventually, if you continue and we go dot, 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 En minus E1 to En, it should be minimized. So essentially what we do is we approach, it gets minimized. So we build resistance and eventually approaches 0. This magnitude converges to 0. So therefore it liberates us, allows us to build resistance against it. And as that gets minimized, it's kind of like the adaptation process. We can go in the positive direction. So generally, every time like you go in a depressive episode, there usually exists something that occurs, some thoughts. It could be the mindset. Of course, there's biological instances. Of course, also drinking makes depression worse in a lot of cases and stuff like this. So we learn based on the cycles. So, for instance, like drinking. This is a good best example I can give. So generally, when you drink, let's just say this is like positive because you obviously want to get a positive effect. So effects, some effect. It could be related to mood, whatnot. So here's the neutral axis. So let's say you start drinking. Well, you want to go in a positive direction. So let's say you go up here, you feel good, and then eventually what goes up must come down. So you go down like this, and then eventually you recharge and you approach a neutral. So this is the recharge. This is a zone of recharge. Okay, so with everything in life, you may get a hangover. That's negative. This is hangover. Like, think of hangover. Who wants to have a hangover? We consider that as negative. This is like euphoria, calm, anything positive. You don't want to be anxious. So it can go in either direction. Sometimes someone may go like in this direction. They start drinking, they go into negative. So these cases are so different, but people who are addicted to drinking generally go into positive. Why would you drink if you're going to initially go into negative? It doesn't make sense. Unless, and then therefore this is a distance. We can relate this as a distance from the neutral, and this is proportional to addiction. Addiction is a force. based on the direction. If there's it's what is not never been attained. As you keep trying to raise the limit, you continue to do so. But here, let's imagine now you drink again at this point. So you may get like another boost, and you drink a little bit more, and go this direction. But now what happens now if you don't recharge up to, and it never reaches that? So this is a new limit. It's a new limit of equilibrium. Equilibrium, I like to define as a force that, if you have any cycle, it's a force that pulls in the direction of the neutral axis. When you're healthy, the force is greater, therefore it's dampened. When you're not healthy, the force is weaker, therefore you're oscillating to psychosis or mania, to deep depression, to mania. But consider now drinking. If you continue to do this process and you continue to go, and then you go up again and you go down and you recharge, and that, now this is not going to be perfect scale, and now you're approaching a new lower limit. So this is like let's say limit 1 equals equilibrium, and this is limit 2 is less than equilibrium, and then this is limit 3 less than limit 2, and we continue this process. We have limit n is less than limit n minus 1, which approaches 0, or approaches negative infinity. Obviously it's not going to hit negative infinity, but let's just say the best instance is like nullity, nothing, emptiness, complete emptiness, apathy, nothing, you're dead. So in this case, this is resistance. You build awareness that now, this is equilibrium. So this is the neutral axis, and then let's just suppose an example like this gets reduced, and you keep, this is like nullity, and you keep going down, and this is like limit 1, limit 2. It can change for everyone. Limit 4, limit 5. It's obviously not going to be to this degree, but you get the point. And now when you make the projection, so previously, so this was like you take initial case, so you have a neutral axis, and you have a cycle that oscillates between, this is mood, and then over time, alcohol abuse, it's negative. You relate this to mood, but now the neutral axis, neutral prime, it's a new axis, and now you oscillate naturally, but you want to go back up to where you were. So basically this is the max. So this is the absolute, this is the, let's say, absolute max, or essentially relative, but it's greater than equal to everything. So what you want to do is, if this is the absolute max, you want to get back up to here. Who would not want to get back? So therefore, drinking is increased usually. But if you realize the negative effect, it allows you to, we have the natural awareness to mitigate this, and basically transform it and get rid of the addiction, because addiction's creating negativity. Once it's realized, slowly and certainly the neutral axis will start increasing again. So stopping the intake, the neutral axis prime will start, maybe not ever get back to here, but it starts climbing. That's why we need the negative to build, to learn, to progress, to move, to do something, to build potential. You always have to learn from mistakes. The yin yang, the dipole, it's everywhere. And so this is a condition imposed that allows us to learn. And I think that is necessary. It's not that negative is negative. You can always transform it to a positive. It just depends on the mindset. So yeah, that's all I have. Just want to explain this. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.